Okay. Hi everyone and welcome for our first online session of AI Summit. Today we have the pleasure to be with Dr. Merouane Debbah, professor at Khalifa University, that will present us a conference about LLMs and their impact in environment. So I will let you with him.
Okay, very good. So, first of all, extremely happy to be with you all. Um, the purpose of my talk is going to be about a new topic that I think few of you are aware of, which is not LLM, but something called large perceptive models, on which I've been working since more than a year, and for which we recently got some very interesting results. And I think that would be very interesting for you to understand where are these AIs going to, and what you can do with them. So my name is Merouane Debbah. I've been a professor at Khalifa. I've been working at the interface of mathematics, telecom, and AI for more than 25 years, even 30 years now. I'm senior director of the Digital Future Institute, which is an institute which gather basically a couple of various disciplines, going from cybersecurity to, of course, AI, to robotics, to basically also telecommunication. And basically the idea is that in the institute we build technologies which are above what we call technology readiness level 4, meaning that it goes into products. And I've been basically also moving from many years academia to industry. I was for many years, more than 7 years, vice president of research of Huawei. I was basically chief researcher at the Technology Innovation Institute. I was, of course, a professor in France, professor here also. So one of the key features of my career has been always to moving back and forth from academia to industry, because I strongly believe that it's within basically this interaction that you start solving problems, you see how they work in practice, you go back into creating more basically breakthrough technologies, and then you see back again how they work in practice and go back again. And so that has been a very fulfilling job in the last years and what I've been doing. So the goal of my talk now is mostly to tell you where the discipline is going, and I think it's quite important for you, especially. I know there's many young researchers, young students who like to know what's next after what's happening today. And so the first, what we call AI wave. When we talk about AI wave, of course, I'm not talking about the 1956, let's say, pioneering work that has been done to kick off all the what we call the AI discipline, but mostly what happened in 2022 for many of you. Although I'll talk about historically, that many of the things that happened in 2022, of course, go back to 2017 and even before 2014 with Gen AI. But the first wave of AI, the way you see it, has been teaching machines to read, write, summarize, and reason. And LLMs, which are called large language model, have become some kind of universal interface for AI. Okay, because you interact with text mostly. And then what we saw is, of course, people adding much more what we call new modalities. What we mean by modalities, it means that you're not treating only the text, you're treating a new modality which is called image, a new modality which is called audio, and which is called video. And we've been seeing, of course, these LLM having inputs, basically, which are these four modalities: text, image, audio, video, and having as outputs also these four modalities, which are image, audio, and video. And of course, what comes next has been basically one of the things I've been thinking a lot on, and have been thinking, of course, a lot on also with my background a bit in seeing what we call the Internet of Things. And one of the big things that I've been very thinking about is how we bring LLMs to the IoT world, the Internet of Things world, and how AI can understand basically the environment, the sensors, the systems, and the signals. The systems and signals are totally different from image, audio, and video, of course. And so imagine a world where you have millions of sensors, where you can incorporate in a model the temperature, the pressure, uh, the RF signals, all these things. And then you start interacting with the environment to start asking questions and understanding and also acting on it. Typically, a case where you could build such a model with all those sensing capabilities You would embed that sensing model typically on your chair, and then you would start speaking to your chair, and your chair would be able to understand a lot of features on your body because you start sitting down. The chair starts telling you, well, Professor Debbah, you're too heavy right now. I think you should be careful about eating too much. I'll take an appointment for you to the doctor in 2 weeks, and blah blah blah. And you start, talking with objects around you. What I'm talking is to you is not science fiction, of course, because once you embed the environment with sensors, then of course the environment becomes by itself also an infrastructure in terms of AI. And so what I'm going to be showing you today is the initial work we did in building what I call the LLM for IoT, which from my point of view is a new breakthrough we've been doing in this discipline with my group here, and where of course we show that language, which started, was just the beginning but not the end point. And the future of AI will be inside network, cities, factories, transportation, and critical infrastructure. Walls are things with which you'll be talking to. The environment you'll be talking to, because all that information will create basically a lot of data. The models will be at the edge, embedded in all the infrastructure, and you'll start interacting with them And of course, the world we're talking about does not speak in paragraphs. The kind of information that is embedded by sensors are streams, states, events, and signals, which poses a huge problem in how basically, of course, you embed that information and build those models. And so the world that we're talking about, and this goes, of course, within the realm of what people are trying to build, what we call world models, is not text. A building speaks through sensors. A city speaks through mobility patterns, typically. A network speaks through telemetry and radio emissions, and a factory speaks through events, delays, and interference. And so what we call large perceptive models, LPM, is the notion of perceptive AI, where you would like to treat basically all these kind of modalities, which goes, of course, from the image audio classically to sensors, radio frequency, I want to talk to the invisible world, typically waves, topology, how is it connected, and context, and basically to be able then to act on top of that. And so the whole features I'm going to be pushing during my talk here is how we have been seeing a shift from what I call language intelligence to environment intelligence. And this environment intelligence, of course, creates new opportunities on how to build new ways of doing machine learning and learning as we used to do. Language was mostly about documents, code, dialogue, and you extracted meaning from text. Multimodality was mostly about images, audio, video, and the meaning was across media. And here, we're taking basically the information from systems, states, scene, and signals, and the meaning come from operational reality. And what you don't want to do is, of course, build those models, interact with them, understand from them the environment, and then after, of course, build agents on top of them to be able to act. And why is it mattering now? Why is it becoming so critical? Well, it's becoming so critical because we are at the stage where we are deploying billions of endpoints and sensors. So the number of devices which are around us is so huge, and we are able today to capture much more data than the classical internet on which we're scrapping everything to build the classical LLMs. We're seeing also a lot of breakthroughs in building those models and making them small enough and performant enough so that they can run in the edge. So you would be able to talk basically to your mouse. You'll be able to talk to your glass, typically, okay? And the glass will tell you, oh, the coffee is too hot for you, Professor Merouane. Be careful, wait a couple of minutes, things like that. You would have basically a doll that you offer to your kids. That doll that you offer to your kids, well, basically, the doll will be talking, giving stories to your kids, but much more. It will be also basically telling to your kids, well, it's too hot in this room. I suggest that you reduce the temperature of the room. And when you squeeze it, oh, don't touch me. You're putting too much pressure. So you're really embedding those models into object. What I'm telling you, of course, also here is not science fiction. Already today, there's big discussions today where in a lot of amusement parks like Disney parks, they're trying to to embed all those puppets with LLMs so that they have some interactions with humans. And so it tells you how far we're going. More modalities with basically vision, telemetry, audio, RF. And of course, you all want to build this and make sure that, of course, you're also taking into account all the risk behind, of course, when you start building. And so um, the whole idea that I want to show you is that we're not anymore in the classical chatbot dashboards understanding, but we need basically to go much further. And my talk is going to be cut into three parts. The first part is what was done. And this is what I call semantic intelligence. And I'll just give a brief overview quite rapidly about LLMs, which I think you're quite familiar with. But it's very important to understand a way of how these things have been built. And this has been at the heart of what people saw since 2022, to be honest, and going on. Then I'm going to talk about what we did as a first step towards basically this LLM of IoT in terms of building a breakthrough model, which was announced, and you can look at it in the press, called RF GPT. RF means radio frequency, where we were able to start basically taking signals as input and starting chatting with waves, okay, in terms of understanding what's happening. And then I'm going to tell you about what's the roadmap we're having at the moment in terms of moving forward in terms of building what we call environmental intelligence, and which of course opens, like humans, the capability of having much more sensing capabilities that we have. So let's start with LLMs. Of course, many of you knew the breakthrough in 2022, and it got extremely viral. And it got extremely viral for a simple reason, is that within day one, many people started using basically these kind of interfaces that we're having. This charts give you typically the time to have 1 million users for the selected platform. When you think of Twitter taking 2 years to have roughly 1 million users and Facebook 10 months, we saw basically ChatGPT having within 5 days more than 1 million users. Today we're reaching roughly 1 billion users. So it gives you, of course, the attractiveness. And of course, whenever there's so many users in a platform and attractiveness, then the capability to monetize it. So people saw immediately, of course, this huge capability, and people are paying for that, which is quite surprising because they're paying a certain fee. And so it means that there's always business to be made behind. The story, as I told you, did not start basically in 2022. If you look at the Gen AI field, it started roughly around 2024, meaning the capability of generating something. Okay, and generating something started with what we call GANs, generative adversarial networks, introduced by Ian Goodfellow. And so we all knew these things were coming. Okay, and then in 2015 we started seeing through DeepMind what we call WaveNet and audio generation, which were introduced by DeepMind, which was quite also impressive with a lot of examples of songs of people who died before they would finish it, typically symphonies of Beethoven, which were not finished, and for which basically we would upload that, and we had basically the whole finishing of that basically symphony. And that was quite striking. I remember in 2015 where a lot of people were impressed of a lot of music which we thought would not be finished by those artists, where we were able to give the context and saying, hey, you're Beethoven, and if you're Beethoven and this is what you started, how would you finish it as a Beethoven basically type of artist? And we got extremely impressive results related to that. And then the big thing, which revolutionized basically from my point of view a lot of how we could scale the training, was of course this very outstanding paper called Attention is All You Need, which if you haven't read it, I strongly encourage you to read it, which appeared in 2017, but roughly, it takes time in research between the time where you publish you write the paper and the time it's published. I mean, venues, if you're in the research realm, it takes roughly 1 year to 2 years before you get the paper basically up in IEEE Explorer, typically between the day you submit it. And so a bunch of guys going from the University of Toronto, University of Google Brain, and DeepMind published a paper called Attention is All You Need. And they solved a very important problem in terms of training, which was basically the parallelization of training. A lot of the training that we used to do in the approaches that we had before 2016 were mostly based on architectures which you all know, which are called CNN and STM. And these architectures were sequential, so it took a lot of time to train. And if you wanted to have models of the size of a billion parameters, then you needed to find an architecture which could scale and parallelize your training. And they came up with an architecture called the transformer, which is at the heart of basically the technology, which is called GPT, which means generative, which goes back to Gen AI, pre-train, and transformer architecture. And I think that's very important. And so if you were during that time of 2016, 2017, and I was part of that, you would see basically these things coming. Because in 2017, we already knew that GPT started, and then of course GPT-1, GPT-2, GPT-3, GPT 3.5 that you got with the Chat GPT. So it was a very interesting time, and of course I was within that time, and that's one of the reasons, of course, I could capture that thing quite rapidly and built one. Maybe you heard of a big model that we released in early 2023, which was called Falcon. So my team was behind that, which was the top-ranked open source model in 2023 in terms of LLMs. Quite interestingly, by the way, and I think it's very important also for all the researchers who are here, the people who wrote the paper, which is at the heart of all this, I would say, GPT type of trend, are not the ones who exploited it directly. When you think about it, ChatGPT was released by OpenAI. It wasn't released by Google. Google, of course, after was able to catch up with Gemini. But this is classical in research. If you work in that domain, rarely the people who invent something are the people who can exploit it. And there's very good examples. I mean, one of the main big research centers in the world is called Bell Labs. If you never heard about it, it's a research center in the US around New Jersey. And they were at the heart of invention of many breakthrough technologies, the transistor, the Unix systems, a lot of things in optics. I mean, I could spend hours in telling you what Bell Labs invented. But if you take the transistor, typically, it's not Bell Labs, but the company which was behind called AT&T. AT&T is a big operator. It was financing basically the Bell Labs. But it was basically Intel that you all know, which exploited. And this is classical in science. The people who invent something are not, in general, the people who know how to do the business out of it and the scaling. And it takes a bit of time to see that afterwards. But in any case, that led, of course, to a lot of people coming and jumping in it. And as you can see, in 2017, we had Google, which released Earth. In 2018, OpenAI releases GPT-2. 2020, GPT-3. So if you were within that realm, you would see already these models getting better and better. 2020, of course, you would start seeing deep fakes and people being generated images. Maybe you forgot a bit, but a lot of the images around 2021, pre-era of ChatGPT, were done with DALL-E. So I was playing a lot with DALL-E to generate image, and that was very impressive. And you had Midjourney, Stability AI, things you don't hear that much now because they all got basically some sort of absorbed by the top deep seeks and whatever. And then basically 2022 with the launch of GPT 3.5 and the chatbot behind. And so I think it's very important also to go back to the history and see. I mean, of course, their history goes much further back to 1956 with all these winters that everybody talks about. But it's very important basically also to see that this revolution that we're seeing is a 10 years revolution. And in general, to get something as what we had today, it takes you 10 years of work before you get it. I'm telling this because a lot of my work also is about a technology called 6G. So I don't know if you know about 6G, or I'm sure you know about 4G and 5G. But these are also technologies that take 10 years. We've been starting to work on 6G since 2020 for information, and we hope that we get all the results by 2030. So research is something that you get on the spot because it's all about different directions, as you can see, different companies, different approaches, one by one, before you get this release that we all talk about. By the way, something interesting is that on this transformer architecture, there were some authors in it. And these authors, which are basically at the heart of that paper, turned out to create many companies. And typically the six authors of that paper, by the way, that paper, also if I'm talking to academics here, has much more citation than I think any professor I know around my surrounding. I think it's 200,000 or 300,000. I haven't checked it. You should check it if you have time, but it will tell you a bit where we are. But this tells you also that whenever there's also, this is good in terms of science and breakthrough research, the people who are at the heart of something, whenever also, it helps also creating much more than just the paper, because at the end, as you can see, all these guys start creating a lot of companies. But this is also something that happened in the past. If you take typically a company called PayPal, I don't know if you're familiar with PayPal. PayPal is a bit similar. If you look at who are the founders of PayPal, well, that gang, which was at the heart, created a lot of big companies, which created a lot of big economy related. Of course, there was Elon Musk, who was at the heart of PayPal. There was also a guy who was the heart of Palantir, a big company, now also valuated at billions of dollars. You had also the founder of LinkedIn, who's also part of that. And they all created those companies, which are now at the heart of that. And I think this is also very interesting, is that sometimes a group of people is not only about creating something, but the aftermath of that is also a subset of companies related to that. So today within those LLMs, we can do all these things. And I think you're all very familiar with that. We can, of course, start to understand and solve. Many of you are using already Copilot. We're able to create, generate descriptions, marketing campaigns, and things like that. We're able to make agents. And what's the most, I would say, pleasant for many people is the fact that you can entertain. And entertain meaning that you can write your books, your images, your reports, and things like that. And of course, today it goes much more further than that, in the sense that we're not just creating those things very simply, but we're able to play with a lot of modalities. We're able to input in those models different subset of documents, going from text, images, audio, videos, and getting as an output basically text, image, audio, and video. And you can play around all these things, which showcases the things. And the power is impressive. I love this example, by the way. So this is typically a situation. I don't know if some of you have been to the US, but these are typically what you have when you start parking in the US in general. You have all those signs, and very complicated. So here, typically the sign says, no parking, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., Tuesday, street cleaning, two-way school days, stopping from Monday to Friday from 7 to 4 p.m., school days exception. And so you have all that kind of information, and in general, you don't know what to do. I mean, you're not going to spend your time. What you do, you just take a picture and say, it's Wednesday at 4 p.m. Can I park at this spot right now? Tell me in one line. And typically, this is exactly what the systems can do today. Yes, you can park for up to 1 hour starting at 4 p.m. So a lot of complex situation where you have a lot of groceries coming in your house, and you just take a picture and say, hey, based on what I ordered, tell me what's missing. Just by taking the picture of all those groceries, will tell you basically if your order was satisfied. You put a lot of bags around you. This I did a couple of weeks ago. You want to go basically to the beach, and you ask, based on all these things, do I have all the necessary things to go to the beach? Am I missing something? And it's going to tell you, yeah. Usually you eat watermelon, so watermelon is something, and some selecto that you always take is not there. It's going to give you that information. So it tells you how far we've been in those models, and this is why it's impressive. And today, of course, you have a lot of what we call Gen AI use cases, which are being used heavily. I mean, quite surprisingly, the most used is the code generation. And this is one of the reasons a company that many of you know, Anthropic, with its, I would say, masterpiece tool called Claude, is basically one of the big things at the moment being used in companies, because everybody now is trying to speed up basically the coding of a lot of features. But it goes to support chatbots, interpret search, text, data extraction, transformation, meeting summarization, copywriting, image generation, coaching, workflow automation, and web research automation. So it gives you a lot of use cases on which you go. And so when we saw that, my team, of course, we were in 2022. We started, as I told you, building those LLMs, foundational models. So I built a frontier model. I mean, I could spend time and a couple of hours in explaining how we built it, and I have a bit of experience related to that. But what I want to say is that quite rapidly around 2023, a lot of people started saying, okay, frontier model is becoming basically sort of a consolidation market. What I mean by that is we're not going to have 1 billion frontier models. We're going to have maybe it's like operating systems. We're going to have 5 to 10. Google for certainly is going to be there. XAI, you have Mistral, you have DeepSeek, you have Quinn. But at the end, it's like operating systems. You don't have 10,000 operating systems. You have iOS, you have Android, and you go like that. And the reason is that the cost to build them is so huge, and maintaining them, only a couple of companies. So starting in 2023, we started thinking of, this is not where the game is, because frontier models, basically only a subset of companies will be there. And what's going to bring you money, what's going to bring you value is on top of that. And on top of that, what happens is what we call the vertical. And so on verticals, there's a lot of things to do, because basically this is where you fine tune your model and you become an expert of a domain. And this is, of course, where the value of the market comes in. But the first thing we start to ask ourselves is, well, the telecom market is an interesting market. It's a vertical. There's a lot of needs related to that. And we wanted to understand first, are the frontier model working quite nicely for this vertical? And we started taking a lot of models, and all the models that we took were struggling in being able to answer or solve telecom problems, troubleshooting all these things, which showcases that models that you take, which are basically those frontier model, or what we call generalist model, are not capable of solving your problem. So you need basically to start building some expertise to be able to solve. And so how first we start to understand that they were not being solving? Well, you benchmark. You take all those models, you build a benchmark. We worked with GSMA, which is a big consortium of telecom operators, and starting taking all those models and starting to understand that there's a need to work out basically more basically models that are specialized. So we built basically some benchmarks. And we launched during the Mobile World Congress that was in 2024, basically the Open Telco benchmark. And you can check it out. Basically, it's on Hugging Face. I mean, my whole team is there. It's what we call the GSMA Open Telco LLM benchmark, where we're starting basically to benchmark some models and say, all those models are not good in terms of scores. And so what we're going to be doing is building our own model called Telecom GPT. So quite rapidly, we released in 2024 the first basically model, fine-tuned telecom domain, which was top ranked, called the Telecom GPT. And so you can look at the news also related to that. And my team was behind at the paper. If you're interested, it's called Telecom GPT Framework to Build Telecom-Specific Large Language Model 2024, which gave basically all the ingredients on how to build it. And so how do you do these things? This is nearly the same kind of strategy for any vertical. You start doing a source collection of all the data corresponding to your vertical, finance, biology, whatever. You take all the data that you can imagine, going from archive, from these operators. You do an extraction pre-processing, and then you do a task-specific data creation. You don't basically create a frontier model for that. You take an existing model, a general purpose LLM, and then you do your supervised fine-tuning on top with some reinforcement learning on top. And then basically you start doing your instruction generator with the telecom treasure. This is how you do. You don't choose one general purpose LLM, you choose a couple of ones, because it's not because you're taking the best in the market that by adding basically and fine-tuning, you're going to get the best. Because sometimes you have pollution of data or deduplication, which makes that your model is not working. Because in general, all those models which are on the market, which are frontier model, they don't release the data. So you don't know which data basically they've been trained. Maybe there's already some subset of your own data which is there, and that creates a bit. So you need to take a subset and then you start building those things that we do. And this is what we did. And then we went into all those use cases which were brought by the telecom industry, telling us what we need is first a sort of interface which you can answer and chat in telecom words, and can answer any kind of question you want related to standard things like that. This is typically what you have. You start asking, what does IAM stand for and why is it considered desirable for constellation communication systems? It gives you an answer which is much more accurate than what we would get basically with the chat GPT typically. Second, a lot of the people in the telecom domain told us, when we have people in the field, they don't know if they have to put the red cable, white cable when there's a problem, things like that. And usually they need to look at the manual. We don't want that. They just want to talk to their phone and say, hey, in this situation, should I put a red cable or white cable? And so it gives them basically what we call the assistance that you need to do, which is now becoming a classical in all the domains. Typically today in Algeria, you buy basically, a medicine. That medicine in general, it's powder. And then you say, okay, it's powder. Then to that medicine, I need to put some water. How much water I need to put? How am I going to do dosage? Things like that. What you do, you start opening basically the prospectus, and then you start reading things. This is the pre, I would say, AI era. You don't need to do that anymore. You just basically chat with your phone because it was fine-tuned on all these kind of things, and you just say, I bought this, how much water I need to do it, and start interacting with you on how you do it. And this is going to be channelized in everything. When you start installing your TV, when you start installing something, all these will be models which are specifically designed for these things. And so this is going to be a trend, and this is typically what we did. We also wanted that people could understand at high level telecom code, and we trained with all the telecom code understanding. Also to generate script of codes in telecom by training on all the data, and we had very good performance related to that. We also started writing research papers in the telecom domain, where, in general, when you write research papers, equations are extremely complicated to write. You don't want to spend time on that. And so we took some papers based on our training, took off the equations, and asked the system, please fill in the missing mathematical equation represented by mask, placeholder, the provided sections of a telecom relevant research paper that discuss the system model or problem formulation, and then gives you all the description that you can see. So quite happy. And then we went one step forward also. We said, okay, in many cases, we want to add multimodality. What I mean by multimodality is that, images. And a lot of the people in general, they have problems with their Wi-Fi boxes. And whenever you have a problem with Wi-Fi boxes, start blinking. So what do you do? Well, when you start blinking, you take the phone and call the operator. However, a lot of the first steps that the operator tells you to do, which are based on the information you tell him about what is blinking and how fast it's blinking, which is known as troubleshooting, by the way, does not require a call. You just need to take a photo or a video, and you start interacting and chatting with your telecom GPT and ask, hey, from what you see, what should I do as step one? It tells you step by step. And so we took all the different images of boxes, all the interactions of calls with customers, and start building that and start working basically on the operator here in the UAE in terms of solving. And this is something also you can do on your side very easily. Okay, so that was basically until beginning of 2025. And we said, but the world in which we're talking with these different operators is a different world. The world of telecom is not about basically a world where they talk about text, images, and video, although we looked at some examples and we were able to solve. It's a world where we have 5G, 6G coming in, a lot of information, a lot of sensors, a lot of IoT. How could we build a model that could understand the invisible world of intelligence? And so we released, basically took us more than a year to work on that, the first model called RFGPT, which basically understand wireless signal intelligence. And it was praised by a lot of big ministers here and around for information. If you want to get more information on the paper, we released also all the way we did it. It's called RFGPT Teaching AI to See the Wireless World. And the idea is that we build an AI foundational model that understands, classifies, and interprets RF signals across technologies and spectrum bands. And is able basically, so you just take the signal and you start chatting with the signal. I'll show you some example and ask, what is this kind of signal? Am I measuring 5G? What is basically happening at the moment in my spectrum? And you start basically being able to understand all these things. And it goes from protocol structure to spectrum occupancy, wireless technology, RF environment diagnostics, temporal RF activity, and signal modulation. So it goes quite deep in what we do. So what do you do with RFGPT? So, and I'll tell you then how we build it. The first thing is you describe, you talk to the signal. So typically you measure and you say, hey, describe this RF scene, and it tells you this capture shows a 5G NR. NR means new radio for people who are not familiar. So it's a kind of signaling format, 5G. Downlink in FR1. FR1 is a band in 5G with two active user equipment. Both transmissions share the same carrier but occupy separate, what we call PRB allocation. It's also very specific terminology in telecom. And then we ask, do you observe other wireless technology? No. Only 5G and R are present. There is no LTE, no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, and other wireless signal detected. Any anomaly in the spectrum, no anomalies detected, and it goes into very detailed how to. But you can go also a step forward and say, based on the electromagnetic environment that I'm measuring, what are the users likely doing based on this RF activity? And it tells you, well, periodic uplink bursts from UAE1, consistent with video conferencing, likely real-time encoding, downlink heavy traffic with large transport blocks for user equipment 2. User equipment means it's a phone, interacting video streaming or content consumption. And the conclusion it gives you is very nice. Combining radio frequency scheduling, buffer status report, and modulation patterns, the phone one is likely engaged in an interactive application. It tells you this guy is certainly, from what I'm measuring from the environment, doing a Zoom or Teams like. And the second guy is passively consuming high throughput media, meaning downloading some kind of YouTube. And so you can basically start detecting also what's happening in the environment. But you can also do a step further by predicting the signal. What will happen to this RF scene in 10 seconds? And it tells you, well, this is a dense urban 5G deployment with moderate mobility. Based on Doppler spread and scheduling patterns, I predict the phone one will experience a 3 to 5 decibel SINR drop to the incoming blockage. So it tells you also what it can see in the future and what's likely to happen. The GNB scheduler here is a base station will reallocate PRB towards user 2, which shows more stable channel conditions. A beam switch is expected within 6 milliseconds to maintain link reliability. And what's even more interesting is that you can also build an agent on top of that and just say, optimize what's happening at the moment because I want to have latency critical application. And it tells you what you have to do. Well, reassign the phone one to a higher priority scheduling, reduce what we call the modulation coding format slightly to improve the coding reliability on the low SNR, trigger beam refinement to stabilize channel condition, allocate continuous PRB to reduce fragmentation delay, and you go on step by step. So it tells you how powerful the system. So how does RFGPT works? Well, the way it works, or the way it should work, and then the way we did it, the way we work is to take what we call the signals. So it could be electrical signals, but here it's RF signals. What I'm telling you, by the way, is not necessarily linked to RF. You could do it for audio. You could also, based on the sound, say, how many people are in the room? Where are they located in the room? And you start interacting with your chat based on the sound that it's measuring and telling you what it thinks about the environment, what kind of people are in the room, are they black, are they white, are they Spanish? And it starts giving you more information just on the sound that you measure, but you could go in every type of frequency bands, okay? Every type of frequency bands. And so this is what I'm telling you, it can be applied to any bands based, of course, on the data that you can have, okay? And so in essence, what you do is the same approach. You would take the signal. The signal is a complex signal. It has two components, one real, one imaginary. It's called the INQ component. And then you apply a tokenizer. And you tokenize that thing, and then you start building. If you do that, it's extremely complicated. Why? Because the format of tokenizing basically a signal will not be compatible with this frontier model that we have. And so you would need a lot of data, craziness in terms of data to do that. And so what we decided to say is the following. When we think of people who are working in the signal industry, they never work in the time domain. And I think if you go back to school, the first thing they teach you is something called the Fourier transform. they go in the spectrum domain. Why? Because in the spectrum domain, you're able to capture quite rapidly what's happening. And any RF engineer that you take, if he looks at the spectrogram, he's able to tell you what's happening in an environment. We always go in spectrum, and this is the big power of the Fourier transform. You lose a bit the phase information, but the spectrogram contains a lot of information to do your understanding. You don't have 100% of your understanding, but you're able to capture more than 95% of your understanding. So what we said is, well, if it's in the spectrum domain, then let's take the signals and go in the spectrum domain. But then a spectrogram is an image. So instead of training from scratch, basically an LLM by using signals and the INQ samples and trying to tokenize, let's then take an existing powerful VLM, which has this understanding capability, fine-tune it with a lot of spectrograms. And then based on that, basically start applying what we did. So this is what we did. We start basically now building a radio frequency language model using the RF signals, but basically going to the spectrum and using a VLM on top of which basically we start fine-tuning. And so this combination turned out to be very useful. You'll read the paper and how we matched both. Of course, we needed to gather a lot of data. The data that you gather basically will never be enough by measurements, because you'll never be able to measure a lot of configuration. So we resolved to something that all the industry is doing, is called synthetic data, by generating a lot of simulated cases, quite realistic, and adding them on top of the real data to be able then to embed our system and be able to answer. And then, of course, we built the whole pipeline chain of the spectrogram with all the description in a very neat manner to get all those numbers. So that was like more than 500,000 basically PRs that we did it. And then what you get is typically exactly this interface that you're seeing. So this is a real-time interface where you embed your signal and you ask any question. So let's go back here. If you describe this RF scene that I told you before in detail, it tells you, well, the spectrum shows the 5G NR, overall layout, wireless technology present. What is user equipment 1, so phone 1 doing? What is phone 2 doing? All these things, so quite things. And you continue chatting. Once it gives you all that information, you can come to the second question. Any here anomaly exists, and then boom, you send, you chat with the machine. No obvious anomalies are visible. The SSV follows are expected case pattern. Please correctly align with the data burst. Do you observe other wireless technologies? We put tech here, and here, as you can see, it's also going to go at that step and going. Only 5G NR are present in the capture and things like that. So quite strong. What I'm telling you has been built in real life, meaning that we took a laptop, we put the model on the laptop, we put basically what we call USRP, which is sort of a modem, if you want, with an antenna to measure the signals, and started basically playing. And of course, we compared our results with the classical model. And if you take a Llama, typically model, not RF GPT, it's not capable of giving you the description. It will just see an image there, and it's not able to go much deeper than what you have. And we put basically Gemini Pro as a judge. And you have here basically the wrong answers that were given all the way towards Llama, typically, but you can take any other type of model to do that. And we went quite deeper, of course, in terms of comparison, because that's the kind of approach you're going to be taking, comparing with GPT-5. And you see with GPT-5, it's outblowing GPT-5, as you can see here. And the reason is that if you take GPT-5, it sees this as an image. And an image will tell you it's just green things. It hasn't the context and understanding that an engineer who's, let's say, fine-tuned during his master studies in terms of how you do this. And I will not go into all the details in terms of comparison. You can check them out, the paper, but this is the kind of things. And of course, also impairments, because in general, also the measurements that you get in terms of RF are not pure, they're noisy. Your antenna is not perfect, all these things. So you need to work all those details out there. So let's go to the third part for the remaining time that I have, which I think is the most interesting part, which is basically the vision that we have. And in terms of vision that we have is RF was the only part. What we think is the future is how you embed in a model temperature, pressure, taste, smell, camera, contact, every kind of information so you can start chatting with the world. And why? Because when you start having billions of sensors all the way around, then basically that's a lot of information that you can gather, and you become more like a human like when you have your interaction with all these objects because you start embedding them. And this is what we call large perceptive models. Now, it's not easy. It's not easy. Why? Because all those modalities that we have are differently represented in how you tokenize them. Very different. Okay. And so it's very heterogeneous. Pressure, temperature is totally different from things. Some contain a lot of redundancy, and it's another way. So it's very different signal types must align in one representation. And this is very complicated from a scientific, which opens the door for a lot of you to work on that. The second is that we're talking about time varying systems. And so also the temporal part, time series part, is also complicated to handle. The other thing also is very complicated is that whatever pressure you measure, whatever temperature you measure, whatever signal, you never have it pure. There's always basically some noise on it. And so you need to have also robustness in terms of the responses you give based on noisy data that you're going to capture and ask basically questions based on noisy data that you have. And so the uncertainty is also needed to be built on top. And so you need also to come up with strategies on how to build that, and also how you ground that, of course, to some maps and reality that you're doing. And so the design principles for the next generation of LPM require a bit of work. And this is what we're doing at the moment. RFGPT for us was only the showcase that these things are possible. First, you need what we call physics-aware representation, cross-modality alignment between what we said, between sensor topology and language, natural language explanation without losing signal fidelity, and edge-to-cloud deployment and real-time constraints, okay? And of course, you need also to build the trust, observability, and human oversight behind that to make sure that these things are working the right way. And since basically what we're doing will sit inside the infrastructure, of course, these models have then to be, of course, quantized to be able to go and take care of all these, what we call safety. False positive and misanomalies have real world costs, as you know, governance, who validates, audits unauthorized machine interpretation, and human in the loop. Good interfaces matter as much as good models because you're building basically something we're interacting. And so what's next when we talked, you remember, about LLMs, multi-model? Well, first, what I'm telling you, of course, is the world of what we call physical AI. I think you heard this terminology, where robot sensors and environments connected to perceptive models. This is built within AI native networks because you have the connectivity that brings your data, networks that understand, explain, and adapt in real time. Invisible intelligence, where systems that perceive what humans cannot directly sees. And of course, you will need new interfaces on how you interact. These antennas that we're talking about previously. Now, until then, what I showed you right now is mostly building those models, chatting, understanding, but we did not act to solve, because a lot of the question we'll be asking to those models is not about tell me who is things, it's about optimize this. And so this is a hard question because it requires, of course, to start also thinking of when you build these LPM, how you will design basically an architecture to be able to do what we call solving agents, which are doing that. This is some initial work that we did for information, some work that we started doing on looking at how we could use these large language models at the beginning as what we call solvers. And now, of course, using LPM as solver. We started asking questions where somebody asks a given question in text form, and here it's going to be related to the environment and how it's solved. So here, typically, you have charged my EV, electrical vehicle, by 7 a.m., but reduce the cost. And you want to give it to your solver to be able then to act, okay? So this problem, typically stated in a certain form, is not an easy problem because how do you solve that question? And you need basically to build a pipeline of architecture which is able to understand step by step how we did. And so what we did as an exercise is build a 3-agent architecture. The first one is an LLM-based intent recognition agent, where charge my EV by 7 a.m. but reduce the cost. it immediately understands that it's a linear programming problem. Clear? Once it's a linear programming problem, it knows how to write it. Then you have what we call an LLM-based parameter identification agent, which looks exactly at your different constraints and put them in the equations that it has identified as a linear programming problem. Quite surprising. This is done automatically. And then you go basically to your LLM-based optimizing solver to be able to go. And so what I'm telling you now is that, of course, this feature that we have done, now we're extending it to the NPM agents, where basically for a given environment, you would say, the temperature is 5 degrees based on what you're seeing, blah, 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 and my health thing. And now find me the best climate at the moment in which I should go, blah, blah. And then it solves the problem. What we did basically was a very good example, but you have to know that it does not generalize because not all the problems are linear programming problems. So typically, if you ask an agent, solve me the climate change, or it's not a linear programming problem. And so for linear programming problems, we know how to do it. When you go outside the realm of linear programming problems, the gates are quite open to solve. So I strongly encourage you, if you have time, to read the paper, because I strongly believe also in all these solvers, which we are using at the moment to solve these things. And you come up with architectures where you have specialized agents. Some, of course, are LPM, which understand the world. Others will be the solvers, which are behind to do what we're talking about. I'll finish my talk with, I think, 5 takeaways, and I hope you got a bit of a hint of what's happening for you in the future. LLMs, or what we call large language models, were, from my point of view, the first chapter. Certainly not the whole book. NPMs, large perceptive models, what we kickstarted as work, extend AI from text to environments. IoT is the natural testbed for perceptive intelligence. And building the LLM for IoT, which we call large perceptive models, is, I think, the next big thing to do. RFGPT, which was our first model, shows that AI can learn to understand the invisible spectrum. And the next frontier of AI is not only what machines can see and can say, but what machines can perceive. Okay, I stop here, and I hope it was interesting as a talk. Happy for the remaining time to answer your questions and give you some insight. I hope it was interesting. Okay, so I do have a problem in the sound.
No, it was me. Thank you so much. It was a so interesting talk. I personally enjoyed it so well. It was amazingly explained, and I didn't see the time pass at all. Yeah, so thank you again for taking from your time to present us your work, and it was really inspiring. I have a personal question, but I would like firstly to ask the chat. Yeah, to ask the chat if they have some questions to ask you.
Okay, so I don't see the question of the chat, to be honest. So, okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing this enlightening talk to us. Yeah.
Okay, so no problem. In fact, like my first question would be like, yeah, we can imagine that the gap between the research world and the industry world is like really big. As you talked about it with LLMs and what happened with ChatGPT and so on. You saw it come in the research world, but like how does we do the transition from the research world, like what you're doing as mathematical theory, to a real application in our current world? Like what's the pattern that's repeating in this particular field? And thank you.
So that's a good question. It's not an easy track, in the sense that these two worlds, in general, for some reason that I understand, are quite deconnected, because a lot of the people who do research are mostly knowledge driven, or what we call basically science driven. Whereas basically the people who are in general producing are what we call business driven. And so what I mean is that in science in general, you come up with a problem. In industry, you are there to solve problems. And so, however, you cannot spend your life solving problems. Why? Because at one moment you will need to create new tools, new opportunities, and also basically new needs. And so the best way is that the people who are, I would say, more science driven or knowledge driven, they open the door, but they should always find a way to start narrowing at one moment to focus on something. Because it's good, it's always good to create some knowledge. And this is the whole world of academia, is to create knowledge. One moment, at the moment you move, you can't solve everything. You need to narrow, and narrowing requires that you start talking with industry. Why? Because industry are the ones who know their daily problems. You cannot come and say, "Oh, I have a hammer, and find me where I should hit." No. At one moment, you create a hammer, certainly, and then you start saying, "Okay, what are the different things that you need to solve here?" And then you say, "Okay, then I need maybe to adjust my hammer." And so, close interaction and discussion is very important. Meaning, dialogue is very important. If you don't do that, then you're lost because you're completely disconnected. And so, this is why one of the things I've been doing is always moving back and forth because it connects me. So, of course, if you're able to find a job in academia which enables you to be connected on a daily manner with industry, which is rare because everybody has a job, everybody has some constraints, you're not able to do it, but that is very important. Yeah. So I'm seeing a question here: current trends in research are in world models or LPM part of this? Yes, definitely. So world models are basically the one of the overall architecture in terms of grounding basically those models reality. And so they are at the moment mostly vision driven, which I think you're losing a lot. I think vision, and of course, there's different architectures. There's like two or three basically categories of people working on that. You have basically Yann Lequin with something called JIPA. It's an architecture that he's pushing. You have, of course, Feifei Li from Stanford, which is mostly working on spatial models. You have also Eric Shing from MBZUI for another type of approach. But they're very, let's say, vision driven in how they work, not considering all the different part that we talked about here.
Okay. Uh, yes, there is another question. Like, how about hallucinations in Telecom GPT and or RFGPT?
Yeah. So this is something that you never avoid at the moment because of the way they're built with the transformer architecture, which are what we call basically statistical type of models. So we do have, of course, hallucination. What you do, of course, is you put some hard coded guardrails for some high risky type of answer. This is the only way you have to do it. We haven't solved either for us or for any vertical question of hallucination. It's always going to be there because it's intrinsic to the fact that you are providing basically only probability of getting an answer. It's never with certainty that an answer is given. And so this you'll never avoid because it's at the heart of architecture. That's the first one. Second reason why hallucination is there is also on how you reward basically systems. What I mean is that let me give you an example, and it's quite an example basically in AI. So if I give you an exam, and I tell you you have multiple question answers. Okay, so you put, and for each question you start filling. If you don't fill a question, okay, if you don't fill a question, if you fill wrong a question, okay, today in LLMs we don't give you negative points. So if you had some questions that you don't know in exam, what you do at school, you always give an answer. We'll try to give an answer because in the worst case, you don't get a negative point. So it's better to always provide answers, even though they're wrong, because you test your chance. And this is at the heart of hallucination. You will always give basically a thing because in the worst case, you get zero. In the worst case, you get a point. And so the way we reward all these models has to change is that whenever you have a wrong response, we should give you a negative point and not just give you zero, but negative point. And so this is also something that has to be changed, but it's at the core of how these systems operate. Then you have a question called, you mentioned physical AI. Why do you think PLM can contribute to the robotics roadmap? Well, of course it can contribute because again, I told you, if you think about humans, we're not just embedded with sound in the ear and basically vision. We have also all those sensing capabilities, and those sensing capabilities are part of what we do, the signals that you do. And RF It's also a big part of how with ultralights and things like that you can. So it's part of that. The only question why people have not been jumping on that is it's very hard to as I told you to embed all those modalities because you need some alignment to do it. And so this is what we've been showing more.
Thank you. So I also have another question. It's like, now, what is the biggest bottleneck for deploying those large perceptive model into real-world application?
So there's a bit of work. First, we need still much more data, which is based on synthetic data. By the way, a lot of the students of your school, I mean, if they would have time, I think today's a good investment in terms of startup is to build companies which do synthetic data. As you know, we're lacking data in the world at the moment. In internet, all the data has become Gen AI data. So 25% of Wikipedia now is Gen AI data for information. And so if you train models on Gen AI data, you have what we call model collapse. And so one of the things that you could do is kickstart building companies which are capable of creating synthetic data through digital twins, whatever. And these, by the way, big companies are willing to acquire. So typically in Arabic, if you're able to generate, real up to very close to real Arabic type of data, then people would acquire you immediately. I mean, if it's just some students are able to create a lot of data set in Arabic outside because we can't find good Arabic data at the moment. For some reasons, because many of you don't write in Arabic anymore. On the internet, nobody's writing in Arabic anymore. You're all writing in English, things like that. And so the majority of people are not writing anymore too much. So the quantity of data is over there. And so one of the bottleneck is of course getting more and more IoT data. You can never do enough measurements. It would take you a lot of time, a lot of deployment. That's the first thing. Second is, and it goes back to a question that I'm seeing just after is of course making sure that at the end you're taking data from IoT, you're building models, and then you want to bring back those models to the IoT. And so how you bring back those models to the IoT is also the question. The RFGPT model that we did is a 3 billion parameter. It doesn't run on IoT. It runs, however, on a laptop, which is already good. The question is how you push it to run on an IoT, which requires techniques which are related to what we call quantization. But quantization makes you lose some performance, so you have to be smart in how you do it.
Like, that's pretty amazing. But like, how do you really make the difference between synthetic data and generative AI one? Are there any techniques in this specific field of?
Yeah, no, so Gen AI data means that you are creating data based on using a Gen AI model. Synthetic data that I'm talking to you is based on physics principles. So typically you do simulation, ray tracing.
Okay.
That's what I mean. This is good. If you do AI, which is generated by a Gen AI model, I told you it's been proven. If you train a model on data which has been Gen AI, it collapses. It doesn't work. And by the way, this is something that we're seeing already now is that we don't have data on the internet, and nobody writes on LinkedIn today. It's crazy. Everybody does his posts by writing something, going on ChatGPT, and then asking and doing this, which is a big problem. And so you need to be very inventive. And so companies like Scale AI, I think you've been hearing about these companies, has been making huge money because basically today everybody's looking for high quality data, which is physics inspired, meaning based on Maxwell equation, Newton equation, some physics principle which we all agree on, which are at least as close as good to reality. For example, for voice in Arabic, we don't have a voice generator human which is close, which is not Gen AI, but creates basically the Arabic tone and things like that. So if you come with something like that, you make huge money. Or maybe you have some ideas, I don't know.
Okay. I think that's it. We don't have any more questions, and it has been a whole hour with you. It went like so quickly. I thank you so much for your time. We have another question. I think it's the last one. There are companies that use physical informed neural nets to generate and simulate data. Yes. Oh yes. So have you a comment on this?
Yeah,
like using
that is one approach typically, as long as it's what we call physics inspired. that is fine. If it's like basically GPT inspired, no. Because if you do a pre-trained transformer to generate your data and then retrain on it, you can create as much as you want, it doesn't work. The other thing also is that you need also to find the right balance between Gen AI data, between real data and synthetic data. This is also very important because if you train all your model with synthetic data, then it doesn't work fully. Typically in our example, we needed to have some real data because real data is noisy. It's not pure. If you do whatever physics inspired in general, it's super clean, it's super pure, but reality is not the same.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for your time, and it was a pleasing having you. I hope you enjoyed doing conference with us well, and thank you.
Excellent. Thanks again
Thank you so
for
much.
taking the time, all of you. I wish you all your best. Hopefully, when I come back to Algiers, I'll have the opportunity to see you and take care. I think
You
it's a
are most
fantastic.
welcome for doing this.
I have the skills to do what I've been showing. So I encourage you to work on this.
Thank you. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. Oof.